Okay, boys and girls, today we've got the Lumin T3 Streamer DAC Preamp on review. I hope you enjoy it. As I said, today we'll be reviewing the Lumin T3 Streamer DAC Preamp. I say Streamer DAC Preamp because it helps to understand what's inside the box and how it would fit into your system, because there are many permutations and combinations of subsystems in equipment today with digital processing and multiple sources and all of that sort of thing. So in this case, what we have is a single box that can be plugged into your network. I suggest hardwiring it with Ethernet cable. And so it's connected up to the internet. And it brings a stream in. I used Tidal and Qobuz, but you can use a variety of streaming services with the T3. Brings in those streams, sends those streams into a D to A converter, produces an analog signal, and then provides a volume control that can be used to adjust the amount of volume that you get out of your power amps. So you're going stream in, D to A, volume control, power amp speaker. That's what you need here. It's possible to set up the T3, really not a big reason not to do this, so that the T3 just functions as a streamer DAC and plugs into a preamp if you have one and want to use multiple sources. I do think, in a way, the optimal setup here with the T3 is if you were the kind of person who just wanted to stream music. That might sound like hardcore hair shirt, but realistically, except for some corner case recordings, you can get a lot done with streaming, and financially you can have hundreds or thousands, presumably tens of thousands of albums available to you at effectively zero marginal cost, no extra cost to having such a big library. If you are the kind of person who has been making the transition from CD or CD and LP to streaming, this might be the kind of piece that just makes you go all the way. And you can decide if that's a big sacrifice or a small sacrifice. If you really love vinyl and are committed to vinyl, then you would want to run the T3 into a preamp. But I just want to set up the possibility that it's the sole front end and you're not really very restricted on the recordings you use. Now, yes, I'll give a good example. I have one of the original Lincoln Mayorga Sheffield direct-to-disc LPs that I actually bought in 1974, and you're not playing this without using a preamp here. The reason I'm harping on this is that the volume control in the Lumin T3 is not a conventional preamp. It's a digital volume control, and it's a particular kind of digital volume control called LEEDH. It's licensed from a French company. And the design of LEEDH means that the digital volume control really doesn't truncate any data and therefore impinge on the quality of the signal. at least that's the idea. We'll post a link to a sidebar that we wrote about how LEEDH works and why it's a special kind of technology that does minimal, if any, damage. When we get to sound quality, I can tell you what I heard and whether I thought it worked really well. But if you assume that LEEDH works really well, you've got a streamer DAC that can go without a preamp, essentially, with just a simple amplification circuit driven by a digital volume control to run your power amp. So you've kind of eliminated the cost of a preamp and any damage that the preamp does to the signal. What you're replacing that with is whatever damage the final amplification circuit in the T3 and the LEEDH volume control do to the signal. But the theory is that's less damage than a preamp might do. And that's partially because, if you think about it, most DACs have enough output voltage to drive your power amps to full output, so the preamplifier is an attenuator, not an amplifier per se, and therefore it isn't 100% necessary. It's largely if it's a good one, a super low damage switch and impedance matcher. Okay, enough of Tom Does theory, but you could pay the $5,000 that the T3 costs, and you would have purchased a streamer, a DAC, and a preamp. So I just want to put this in the value equation bucket that I usually do, which is, if you do the simple math, it's essentially $1,700 per piece, a $1,700 streamer, $1,700 D to A converter, and a $1,700 preamp, or mix and match any way you want. I think you can see that if this works for you, meaning if streams are what you want, and if you like the LEEDH volume control, then you've got a pretty high value piece of equipment. Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. As you may know, I'm Tom Martin, Chief Content Officer of The Absolute Sound. We have a new product. It's on the Substack platform, and we're going to do some interesting things with Substack. First of which is reader questions and answers. Each Monday, readers will submit questions. We'll pick the most interesting ones and we'll answer the questions on Friday. We'll also have early access to articles and special blogs that don't appear anywhere else. We hope you'll join us. It's only a cost of a cup of coffee per month. Just check on the screen or in the show notes below. Thanks, and now back to the show. Just a little bit more on the circuitry of the Lumin T3, and then we'll come back and talk about sound quality. There are a number of circuit ideas here, but the core one that you just need to know, which is well defined in the specification sheet, is this uses ESS 9028 Pro Sabre DACs. My personal experience is that ESS DACs often sound quite good, and they make a range of them, and this seems to be quite a good one. So you're getting a pretty good D to A converter. It's not a fully custom D to A converter like we see with DCS or WADX, but it's also not even close to the price point that those products involve. Again, we'll let the sound quality evaluation be the proof of the pudding there, but you're getting a pretty darn good DAC here. You get a streamer that is run by an app. We'll put some screenshots up of the app. I found it to be very usable, surprisingly usable, because I didn't think the graphics were the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, but from a usability standpoint, it worked just fine. There are, as far as I could tell, two limitations to it that may or may not bug you a little bit. It's not Roon, so it doesn't mix your Tidal and Qobuz and Spotify, whatever streaming services use. It doesn't mix all your music together into one single list. So you sort of have to remember that, you've got Mahler stuff on Qobuz, but you've got the Bernstein Beethoven piano concertos on Tidal. I made that up, but you know what I mean. You just got to remember what's where, or be willing to go look around. The bigger your collection, the more that takes an amazing memory. I don't have an amazing memory, so I have to look around a little bit. You could just use one service, but I think you will find, as many other people have, and I certainly have, that each of those services has a limitation somewhere. Qobuz doesn't have every album, although it's got a vast number of albums, but every once in a while there's something you want and it's not available on Qobuz, but you can find it on Tidal. The flip side of that is Qobuz has a much, much better selection of high res, and I'll just say this, you want high res. The T3 decodes up to 384K, and especially the 96 and 192K stuff it's wow, yeah. High res makes a difference. Let me just leave it at that. So, the app you get is, I thought, perfectly usable, kind of enjoyable. Other thing I liked about the physical setup of it is you can get a remote. The remote is, I believe, $200, so you're at $5,200 instead of $5,000. But I really liked the fact that there was a separate remote. And frankly, I use the separate remote for two things. I'm sure you could get fancier and use it for more. I use the remote for two things. One is it has a volume control that's physical, so you can, once you master it, you can not even distract yourself at all to turn volume up or down a number of times during a track without it being distracting. I find that when you have to open up the app and inevitably your iPad has timed out, and then you have to look around and do, physical manipulation on the screen, you just have to be a little bit more careful, and that's a little bit more distracting if you like to kind of gain ride your streams as people like me do. Maybe that's not your deal, and maybe this isn't valuable. I also used it to turn the T3 on and off, although I think, honestly, you can leave it on all the time. I did my switching between albums on the app, which, as I said, is quite nice. The only other limitation of the app, and again, here's an advantage that Roon has over these kind of apps, and I'm sure you can drive this with Roon, so that's not the issue. But if you want to use this app and not subscribe to Roon, the other thing you give up is metadata. Roon has a lot of commentary on different albums, and you're kind of bypassing that. Okay, enough. It's a nice box. It's a silver box. You've seen pictures on screen here. It'll fit in a lot of places. It's nicely finished. I'll come back in a minute and we will talk about sound quality, because that's really a big deal here. All right, let's talk about sound quality for the Lumin T3, because if you're going to use this the way I described, and again, you don't have to. You can run this into a preamp and have 12 turntables if you want to. You can have a FM tuner and a tape deck and all the switching that your preamplifier can handle. No problem. And as a streamer DAC, again, we'll talk about sound quality, but this is a good one. But I think the magic really comes when you use it as straight into a power amp and use the lead volume control. At least that was my feeling. I say that because I used it with my reference. It's my reference, but the Audio Research Reference 6 SE preamp, which is very close to colorless, and I will say I couldn't hear the effect of the audio research on the Lumin. But if you're shopping in this price range, are you really going to run it into a $20,000 preamp? Maybe you are. That's cool. I don't object. But you've got to have a really good preamp to have the preamp seemingly have no effect on the sound. I also run another test, though. I hooked it up to the preamp because that's easier in my system. It's an easier way to use things. I'm used to using the audio research preamp. I can play vinyl when I want to play vinyl, and I can run streams when I want to run streams, and I can even have multiple DACs running into the preamp. And, for a reviewer, a preamp is just heaven. But I did run a test when I wanted to listen to the Lumin. When I hooked it up straight into the power amps, did I prefer to leave it that way, or did I prefer to run it through the preamp? And the answer is my bias on average was to use the lead volume control and have the Lumin running straight into my power amps. That's like I don't know, it might sound like a woo-woo test to you, but it allows you to get at those very, very microscopic differences that you hear that are subtle and you can't really put your finger on them, but you sort of subconsciously know they're there. So, and maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me. I don't know, but I liked the T3 straight into my power amp, so that's how I used it 80% of the time. Okay, how does it sound? I'm going to pin this on the DAC, but you really can't do that. It's the streamer DAC volume control combination that I'm describing. But listening to the T3, I thought the sound was superb. I'm comparing that largely to, first of all, the sound of live music. And what I would say is the sound, especially on high-res streams, was exceptionally good. I would say, if I had to offer a criticism, there is a little bit less than the complete, what you would hear in the hall, soundstage depth. And there were occasions when I felt like the T3 put the image on the plane of the speakers rather than a little bit behind the plane of the speakers. Is that wrong or right? That's actually an interesting question. I feel like from the other testing I've done, that's a little bit of a processing error. But again, I'm nitpicking. B, I'm comparing what can be done with a $5,000 streamer DAC preamp to what can be done with a $20,000+ streamer DAC preamp, and the differences are very, very small. The big point I would like to make is I loved listening to this thing. There's something about the sound, and I'll try to describe what that is, but there's just something about the naturalness, the relaxed nature of the sound, the dynamic contrast that it can produce, the tonal purity, and the gentleness when gentleness is called for, and the power when power is called for, that just seemed musically right to me. I kept wanting to go back and listen to this more and more and more because especially high-res tracks sound really good. The other thing I noticed, which is an indicator of high resolving power in the T3, is the differences between Redbook CD and high res are striking. Now that might sound bad to you, but I think an unacknowledged fact of the wonders of streaming is that high res is really a thing, and you can just hear the difference. It isn't that Redbook sounds bad, it's that Redbook sounds normal, and then high res sounds, whoa, amazing. I'll give you an example. This is a recent one, so it's fresh in my mind. Somebody I was reading recently pointed out that they thought Steely Dan's Gaucho, which is I think a 1980 LP, was a very good sounding LP, and I kind of like Steely Dan. They're one of those a little bit odd but well recorded bands. So I was like, that's completely believable. And then I had heard an analysis by a musician, a detailed, like 1 hour long analysis of Babylon Sisters by a musician, and I was really kind of into like hearing what's on that track played over my reference system. So I downloaded, no, I didn't download it, I just streamed Gaucho on the T3, and it's first of all, it's high res. It's 1980 recording, so I don't know what they were doing, but Steely Dan were like just studio nut jobs, so they were probably using edge of the art equipment. But anyway, it's a 2496, I believe, high res recording if you stream it on Qobuz, and just the depth, the layering, the instrumental separation, the spotlighting of the instruments, the purity of the treble, the punch of the drums, the resonance and detail and air in the bass. It was just really, really good, really, really enjoyable, and I don't mean this in the bad way, really, really musical. And Steely Dan can sound a little bit mechanical, but this was getting pretty close to Steely Dan playing in a club kind of stuff. They use some odd chords in there, and that's part of why it sounds a little bit like there's a little bit of tension in the way the music is written, but the reproduction was just engrossing and involving. I could go on and on with musical examples, but I heard thing after thing after thing like that. I then played, just to illustrate what I was talking about before, I played a Doyle Bramhall recording from the mid-1990s. So that's 15 years later, but it was in 44K, 16-bit Redbook CD. And it was just a flatter, a little bit more compressed, very enjoyable still sounding thing. So the ability of the T3 to just separate these streams and really decode them, I thought was brilliant. I loved listening to it. If someone came in and forced me to use this as my streamer, D to A converter, and preamp, I would kind of have no problem, other than I'd have to figure out a way to listen to vinyl, and I'd actually probably consider just hard switching the cables when I want to listen to vinyl, because I know when I want to do that, and I've got to fire up the turntables, and yeah, you guys know the glory and the issue of vinyl is it's a ritual. I'd say it's mostly glory, but there you go. Anyway, the T3 does a really good job with layering, depth, frequency balance, punch, drive, delicacy. All of those things are beautifully done. Again, compared to a DAC, streamer DAC at 5 times the price, I think you can get a little bit more depth and layering and a slightly more natural sound on some kinds of instruments, violins and things with a lot of high frequency content, but you'd never know it without a direct comparison. I don't think you would miss it if you had the T3 as the centerpiece of your system. So there you go. I hope you can tell I really liked this piece. I thought it worked well. I thought the price point was stunning for what you get, and I think you would enjoy it too, depending on the rest of your system. So if it fits with, your price point and the other kind of equipment you have, I think, yeah, this will stand you in good stead. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please subscribe. Please click the notification bell. We would appreciate it if you would do that. That not only helps you get notified when we have new videos, which is multiple times a week, but it also helps us attract more people to the show. So we say thank you if you're willing to do that. Of course, in addition, we would love it if you would subscribe to our weekly newsletter. You can do that. We'll put a link in the show notes, but you can also do that on theabsolutesound.com, and you get notifications of lots of articles, blogs, videos we do. It's a good way to keep up with news in the industry and the things we're writing about. And as always, we've been publishing the Absolute Sound magazine for 50 years. If you are not a subscriber and you would like to become a subscriber, it's easy. It's not that expensive, $1 a month or something like that. And we would love to have you on board with our flagship publication, where we publish some of our most extreme and, I think, interesting reviews and analyses of new technologies. So, again, thank you for watching. We really appreciate you being here, and we hope to see you next time.